Good morning, everyone. It's time to dive into the book of, what are we studying? Proverbs. Oh, there we go, went too far. Yeah, so we're diving into Proverbs, and so if you were here last week, we had our very first sermon on the series through Proverbs, and Lani took us through an introduction to the book, trying to give us a bit of a sense of what this book is all about. And thank you, Lani, for doing a great job last week. Today we're going to be diving into the content of the book. And so how are we going to do that? Well, the first thing is how we're not going to do the book of Proverbs. We're not going to start at the very first proverb and work all the way through. And one of the reasons for that is if you've ever read through the book of Proverbs, you would know that it's at times the organization feels somewhat jumbled up. It's a little bit like, I kind of imagine if you got a bag and you just threw in like hundreds of proverbs, shook it around, poured it out on the table, and then just wrote it in the book exactly as it came out. Sometimes the book of Proverbs feels a little bit like that. Now, there are some exceptions. There are times where there's a few more intentional things in the structure, but there are lots of times where it feels a little bit random how it all stitches together. And so we're going to be going through this book thematically. And so each person who preaches on Proverbs is going to choose a theme and find a key proverb that they feel is especially powerful on that theme, and then we'll draw from the rest of the book as we try to understand what wisdom says about that topic a little bit more. And so the theme that we're going to be looking at today is the rich and the poor. So this is a theme that actually comes up over and over again in the book of Proverbs. So let's see what the Bible has to say about this topic. Well, firstly, I want to sort of begin by sharing a little experience that I had around about 10 years ago. I was in the island of Vanuatu, and I was in this very remote village called Malua Bay on the island of Melakula. And this village was one that, in many ways, their lifestyle is very different to our lifestyle here in Australia. Very little electricity, unless you happen to have a generator or something. There's no electricity in this part of Vanuatu. If you want some food, you have to grow it yourself. Houses are all made out of bamboo, and apart from that one building in the middle with that church there. And if you want to go on a trip somewhere, your options are, for most people, it's walking, or maybe you could build yourself a dugout canoe and paddle out into the water. And so this is kind of the lifestyle that the people live here in Malua Bay. Now, this day in particular was a Sabbath afternoon. We'd had church, had our potluck lunch, and we're sitting there on the beach looking out at the beautiful little bay there, when around the corner came this giant mega yacht. Now, this was, as you can see, this is a pretty elaborate vessel. This was a privately owned boat. The person who owned this, we've actually met him a little bit later on. He was from Dubai, and he has a whole crew that just sails this boat around the world, and when he feels like it, he hops in his private helicopter with his private helicopter pilot, and he flies on into this boat, and he has a nice little holiday wherever it might be around the world. And so here we are, and I just remember sitting there on the beach, seeing this massive boat come into the harbour, and just seeing this village that has this very basic lifestyle, and just being struck by the dramatic contrast between the two. And I think as we think about the world in which we live, this contrast is repeated over and over again around the world. There are some people that have excessive wealth, so much so that they don't even know what to do with it, and they buy things like giant boats with helicopters. And then there are many people who live lives where even the very basic things can be hard for them to obtain. And so the question I have for you is, whereabouts do you fit on this spectrum, on this continuum here between Malua Bay and the mega yacht? And maybe another question, where would you like to be? Where are you striving for? Here we are at the beginning of a new year. What are the things that we're striving towards as individuals? What are the things that we have our minds fixed upon? And then what does the book of Proverbs have to say about all of this? So I'm going to share with you the proverb that I've chosen as sort of the key proverb for this topic, and let's see what it has to say. Now, this proverb, first a bit of context for this proverb. It's in Proverbs chapter 30, which is written by a man named Agur. And we don't have any idea who he was, other than he's the source of these proverbs in chapter 30. And this is what he has to say about the rich and the poor. And in fact, this proverb here, something unique about this proverb as well, is that it's in the form of a prayer. And as far as I'm aware, this is the only proverb in the book of Proverbs that's in the form of a prayer. So this is a prayer that evidently was something he prayed, and something is given to us as something that we can pray as well. Here's what it says. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal, and so dishonor the name of my God. So here's this prayer. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. And one of the things that strikes me about this is how contrary this prayer is to the culture in which we live. The culture that is surrounded us, especially here in Australia, is often more, 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 more. Especially all the advertising that we get bombarded with every day. It's you need more, you need more, you need more, you need more. And in contrast to this, Agar says, give me only my daily bread. And then I find really striking those words, otherwise I may have too much. Now, who here has ever started the year and said, all right, let's make some goals for this year? Maybe you're making a budget and you're praying that God will bless your budget. Who here has ever prayed, God, I pray that at the end of this year, I don't have too much? Not a prayer that I have found myself praying very often. Help me not to have too much. It's something that really is so contrary to the world that we find ourselves surrounded with. There's not many motivational talks that you hear about how you can have not too much. Or classes you might have at school about the troubles of maybe having a little bit too much. In contrast to that, as I said, it's often this culture of just a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. Now later on in chapter 30, Agar gives another proverb where he gives this whole sort of series of metaphors that really give characterize, I guess, this culture that I'm describing of more, more, more. Give me more, give me more, give me more. And this is how it goes. The leech has 2 daughters. Give, give, they cry. There are 3 things that are never satisfied, 4 that never say enough. The grave, the barren woman, land which is never satisfied with water, and fire which never says enough. So here's these 5 metaphors. The first one is the leech. Who here likes leeches? One person over here. I used to like leeches when I was in primary school. I remember we used to go on this school camp to Papenbarra. Now, probably don't know where Papenbarra is. It's out in the bush, a couple of hours out from Port Macquarie. And we'd go out there, and at Papenbarra, we'd go on these bush walks the whole school would go on these bush walks, and you'd go through creeks and swim in little water holes with waterfalls and things like this. And when you get back after having this great adventure, you'd spend 5 or 10 minutes trying to get all the leeches off you. And these little things, probably some of you have had this experience, their whole life is about finding someone to attach themselves to. And when they attach themselves, they suck out blood and they keep going. They suck and suck and suck until eventually they get so gigantic that they fall off and they're just like this great big giant adult creature that can't really do very much because it's just so filled with all of this blood. Quite a disgusting thing when you think about it. So that's the first little illustration here. The second one is, well, there's a whole bunch. I'm not going to look at all of them, but the one that really stood out to me was the one at the end, fire, which never says enough. If you think about a bushfire, what Agar is saying is that with a fire, it doesn't matter how much a fire consumes, how many trees it's consumed, how many logs it's consumed, how much whatever it is. It never gets to the point where it says, all right, that's enough. I've consumed enough. I don't need any more. But a fire will just keep on going and going and going and going and going until it is until there is nothing left to consume. And Agar, I think in this proverb, he's describing an approach to life that is kind of a similar thing to that, which it says in those words there. A lifestyle that never is satisfied, that never says enough. And I want to share with you a little illustration that I actually saw this on Facebook or something. A little meme cartoon thing, and I've kind of just adapted it for this morning. But I think it kind of conveys this idea here. So, when is enough? I want you to imagine it's a Sunday morning, some wealthy businessman from Melbourne hops in his private helicopter. And he goes up and goes in this little joy flight around the city, down to the bay. And while he's looking at the beautiful sunrise, and he looks down on the bay and he sees this giant yacht. He's like, wow. And in his heart he says, if only I could have one of those. If only I could have one of those. Imagine the places I could go. You could go anywhere in one of those boats. Wow, life would be so amazing if I could have one of those. Now, little did this helicopter pilot know that just down on the road beneath him was a guy in this really nice Porsche. And he had been going out for a morning drive, and he looks up and he sees this helicopter flying around. And he says in his heart, wow, imagine having your own private helicopter. I wish I could have one of those. If I could have one of those, imagine the view you could get from up there. Wow, life would be really special if you could have a helicopter like that. Across the other side of the street was a person driving a Honda Civic. And they look across and they see this Porsche and they think, wow, look at that Porsche over there. Imagine that car. That must be such a thrill to drive. Man, that person over there is really living. Now, while this person in the Honda Civic is thinking this, along rides someone on their bike. And they're just riding along. They've been up for a couple of hours, riding to work and doing some errands around the city. And they drive past this Honda Civic, and in their mind they think, I think it's about time I got a car. If I only had a car, I could get rid of this bike. I could achieve so much. Life would be so much easier if I could just have a car. And as he's riding along, a man hops off this bus, and he's walking to work, and he sees this man riding on his bike, and he's thinking, what am I doing here? I'm spending all this time every day walking to work, waiting for buses, running late. Maybe I need to get a bike. If only I could have a bike, then life would be so much easier. Now, looking out of the apartment above is an old man who's sitting in a wheelchair. And he looks down and he sees this man who's walking out of the bus, and he goes, wow, imagine having a young, fit, healthy body like that. He has so much freedom. He can go wherever he wants. Wow, life must be really amazing to be like that. And probably could keep going back and back and back with this story. When is enough? When is enough? We're sold this message in a world that we need more, we need more, we need more, we need more. We need to always have something a little bit more, and then we will arrive at some apparent location. But Proverbs here is actually presenting us a different approach to life. Now, a well-known saying is this one: comparison is the thief of joy. You've probably heard that before. And could it be that we find ourselves spending so much time thinking about the things that we don't have and seeing others who have things that we don't have, that we miss out on the things that we do have? And could it be that as we're doing that, we're actually living someone else's dream while striving for something that we don't actually have within our grasp? How much joy is all of this comparison robbing us in our lives? And so that's the first sort of challenge that I think our world, the culture in which we live, we face with, and what riches we can face in our lives. I want to share a story that from a little while back. So Kylie and I were living in a place, and we had this friend who had this little cottage, and this cottage was a nice little cottage, but they were hoping to do something a bit more special with it. So they decided to go on this really sort of ambitious renovation project. And so they spent 6 months renovating this house, and they did an absolutely spectacular job. And by the end of it, I remember Kylie was talking with them, and went over there and saw the house, and they did an awesome job. It was a really nice place. And as Kylie was talking, the lady said something that really sort of struck her, and really sort of made a big impression, I think, on both of us. She said, I kind of wish, looking back on this, that I was just kept the little cottage that I had at the beginning. And the reason was, in the 6 months that they had spent renovating that house, it had put such an incredible strain upon their family. They lived in some relative's house during that time. During that time, they'd actually had another baby. And so this was a really difficult, precious time of their life, but it was such a time of transition. The husband had spent so much time trying to do lots of the renovations himself, so he was under so much strain. It put a lot of strain on their marriage. And then even at the end of it, they had all this now financial burden that they were now carrying, and it was quite difficult for them at that time. And so they loved the house. But as I thought about it, I thought, you know what? The cost of this house, it's really cost us quite a lot as a family in order to reach this. And I think this is one of the challenges that striving for more riches and striving for more wealth can sometimes have is we look at what we might get from that, but we don't realize the cost that we might have to pay along the way. And as we go through the book of Proverbs, there's a whole heap of proverbs that describe this very thing. They say, yeah, riches might be great, but there's other things that are actually more important than riches. And in fact, you can have less with these things and you're better off than actually having more without these things. So let me share with you some of these sort of better than proverbs that really stood out to me. So the first one is this. Proverbs 17:1. Better a dry crust with peace and quiet than a house full of feasting with strife. In other words, you're better off if you only have a little, but you live in a home where there's peace and there's quiet, than having an abundance, but a home with strife. The second one, better a small serving of vegetables with love than a fattened calf with hatred. You're better off being surrounded by people who you love and that love you than being surrounded by all these things without that. Number 3, better the poor whose walk is blameless than the rich whose ways are perverse. It's saying here, you're better off to have a little bit but have invested in your character and lived a life of integrity than to get to the end of your life and have all these things but have the reality of the things that had to take place in order to get there. What about your health? Proverbs 23 says, verse 4, do not wear yourself out to get rich. Do not trust your own cleverness. Cast but a glance at riches, and they are gone, for they will surely sprout wings and fly off to the sky like an eagle. Do not wear yourself out to get rich. The struggle and the stress of trying to attain something sometimes can take that toll on our health as well, and what our actual health is in our life. And finally, our relationship with God. Proverbs 15 says, better a little with the fear of the Lord than great wealth with turmoil. What this is saying here is if we only have a little, but we have this appreciation of God, we have this walk with God, then that is a richness and a treasure that surpasses anything else we might acquire in our life. And I think this is really, I think, at the essence of what this proverb we read at the beginning is getting at, is in your search for things, don't get so caught up that you lose sight of the thing that is the most important. And notice this, give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? Now, to be fair, as you go through the book of Proverbs is not all down on riches and money. In fact, when you go through Proverbs, it says that God is the source of our riches. He actually is the one who gives them to us. Those are a blessing from God. And it talks about in Proverbs some of the blessings of having riches. And for example, there's safety in riches. If you have money, then you're better off sometimes as far as the opportunities that you can have in life and in the things that you can secure for your family. And there's good things that come with having material things. And Proverbs acknowledges that and says those are good things that come from God. But the danger here that I think that it's describing is if we get too focused on those things and we begin to trust in those things, that sometimes that can shift our trust from trusting and focusing on the God behind those things. And so I think what all these verses are really trying to impress upon us is that your greatest treasure is not your treasure. Your greatest treasure is not the treasure. And what I mean by that last treasure there is those material things. Our greatest treasure is having a home of peace, being surrounded by people who love us, having your health and having a character that reflects Jesus. These sorts of things are more valuable, and they're going to bring more to our life. And ultimately, our greatest treasure is Jesus himself, and having that walk with him and having that friend in Jesus. It reminds me of something Jesus said in Luke chapter 9, verse 25. So what good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self? And I think what Jesus is trying to remind us of is to remember the things that are most important. As I was thinking about this as well, something that I think we have as a church that really helps with this is actually the Sabbath. And what do I mean by this? On the Sabbath, it's this day that we spend our week working and striving and doing things and preparing for the future and investing in all these regular things. But we get to the seventh day of the week and we say, you know what, that's enough. That's enough. Let's put that aside and let's focus on those things that are most important. Let's focus on our family. Let's focus on our God. Let's have rest for our bodies. Let's remember that our greatest treasure is not our treasure. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self? And so what can we take home with us from these verses in Proverbs? Well, the first thing I think that we can take away from Proverbs today is to hear that wisdom that more is not always better. More is not always better. Sometimes in striving after more, we might actually find ourselves with less, losing those things that are actually most important in our life. Number 2, strive for that financial sweet spot. And you might be wondering, what is that financial sweet spot? Well, I don't think it's actually a dollar amount. It's not a specific type of car or a specific place to live. Or I think what this sweet spot actually is, it's this attitude that we have. It's this way of approaching life. It's in a way of approaching that says, you know what, I don't have to have everything. It's this place in life where we can be content with the things that we have. We can come to that place where we can actually say, you know what I've got for today is enough. And I think if we can find ourselves in that place, I think from that will spring joy and freedom and peace. And I think that's going to place us in a place where we can be more generous and we can more easily put God first in our life. So strive for that financial sweet spot. And finally, I want us to think of this in the light of Jesus. Jesus, before he came to this earth, he was up in heaven. If there was anyone who was rich, it was Jesus. Everything belonged to him. All the riches of heaven were his. And yet he looked at all of those things and he said, you know what? These aren't the thing that is most important to me. Do you know what was most important to Jesus? You were. And I was. And Jesus said, you know, all this treasure in heaven, it's not my real treasure, but my real treasure is those people down there on earth. And because of that, I'm going to lay aside all of these things, be born as a baby human being on earth, and to live this life with very little, and then eventually to die a death upon a cross. Because Jesus knew what was most important. And in response, Jesus sends an invitation to us to make him our greatest treasure. And so that's our last one on here, is to make God your greatest treasure. I want to share with you some words from the Apostle Paul. And in the context of this, he's in prison. And in his early life, there's a whole lot of stuff he had that he'd now lost in following after Jesus. And he looks at a lot of this and he says these words. He says, but whatever were gains to me in the past, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them garbage that I may gain Christ. Now, what Paul is not saying, he's not saying that the things of this world are not important or useful or valuable in some way, but what he's saying is in comparison to the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus, there is nothing. And Paul there, I imagine him just having this full heart, knowing that even there in prison, he had his greatest treasure, Jesus. And that meant everything for him. And so I'd like to invite our musicians up the front. And we're going to sing a final song, which is called Give Thanks. And really that's what this is all about, is give thanks to God that with Jesus, you have everything.